I'm joined and thrilled to be joined by Sam Bagnestos. Hey, Sam, thank you. I really appreciate your availability, your flexibility with us, and your sharing some of your wisdom with us. Boy, do we need it.
Happy to be here.
Before we turn to the current set of crises, because I do think it's important, will you take a minute and talk about the successes you saw during your time in the Biden administration?
Sure, and I appreciate that because, it's easy to forget, the very significant legislative successes of the Biden administration. I mean, not only were we able to get shots in arms across the country, when we came into office, I started on Inauguration Day, and we were in the depths of the pandemic. People, the overwhelming majority of people weren't vaccinated even once. We were able to get those vaccines into people's arms, help us move past the worst of the pandemic, get aid to people to really stop us from being in a significant recession, if not depression, and then, make very significant investments in American industry moving forward, as well as, on an issue I spent a lot of time on, working for the first time to really lower drug prices by negotiating the prices of drugs in Medicare. I mean, and success after success after success on that, I don't think we should, lose sight of.
No, and it's important to say them often because the incoming administration is going to lie about your record.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, if you look at where we were in January of 2021 and you compare where we were in January of 2025 before Trump came into office, it's like night and day. People can have arguments about, should we have done this? Should we have done that? I think those are all very reasonable arguments about both policy and politics. But, as far as the policy successes, they were real. They were incredibly significant. They made a huge difference in the lives of people all around the country.
They did, and they were hard fought, hard won, for sure.
Indeed.
Okay, well, so that's pretty good background to talk about what must be just heartbreaking to watch in a week, new administration try and undo that progress.
It really is. And, there's so many angles one could take on this. But I guess, the thing that really hits me is just the complete animus toward the really good, hardworking public servants around the country who are doing the people's business and who do the people's business across administrations. They're not there to serve politics. They're there to serve the people. I started my career in government 30 years ago as a career civil servant. I then left government and came back as a political appointee, first in the Obama administration and then in the Biden administration. But the one consistent through line has been, the United States has had a truly excellent civil service that, regardless of who is president, tries to carry out the laws that Congress passed to serve the public with the programs that are really essential for them. And you see these folks come in who have absolutely no regard for public service, who can't even think of serving the public as even an idea. It's all about, serving their own private interests, who want to fire people, who want to make life impossible for people, who want to freeze programs that people depend on. I mean, it's really enraging.
I too worked in the federal government at HUD during the Clinton administration. So the people, the professionals in the department who were there were ones, who they hadn't hired anybody new in a while. They had sort of lived through Reagan and Bush Sr.'s sort of disdain for the ideals of that department. And yet I found the workforce to be professional and hardworking and very, very talented and deeply understanding of the law and regs that they were supposed to implement. In other words, Congress hired me to do a job. Congress set out a job to be done, and I was hired to do it by the administration. And they were very professional. So I concur with you. It's cruel to the people, but it's also terrible for the country, what they're doing.
It's terrible. It's terrible. People rely on the government. People don't even realize the degree to which they rely on the government. We rely on the government for our health care in very significant ways. Whether we're on Medicare or Medicaid or not, it's health research that leads to the development of drugs. It is making sure that people are not being taken advantage of, with the sale of unsafe drugs or unsafe treatments. But we have nonprofits across the country that rely on the government for their funding so that they can take care of people in their communities. And I think, it's horrible, what we saw this week now with 2 plane crashes. We rely on the government to keep us safe in very significant ways. And this idea that we're attacking the civil servants, who we all rely on and need to rely on. One of the great things about the United States over, the last century plus is the degree to which we have developed a professional government civil service that, again, we can have our complaints about particular things, and certainly I do as well. But on the whole, it works to enable us to live longer, better lives and to cooperate with each other in the community and to feel like we can be a part of the market, knowing that folks won't be out there taking advantage of us. And now we have a bunch of folks coming in who have no respect for that, just trying to tear it all down.
Last Thanksgiving, I had COVID, and I didn't know anymore what was a mild case, but what did that mean? What should I do? How could I protect my family? We're all going to be together over Thanksgiving. Went on the CDC website and learned what I needed to learn, which, meant I had my turkey in a different room. But I learned what I needed to learn. Those pages are gone. They're gone. People can't get that information.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely terrible. It's just this sort of blunderbuss attack on all the things that ordinary people around the country rely on from the government. I mean, I think, CDC is a great example of that. People rely on CDC and public health officials to tell us, the information in rapidly evolving situations, involving infectious diseases, how we can keep ourselves and our families safe. And when that information comes down from the website, that doesn't help anybody.
No. Well, unless you're selling dishonest medicine, which I'm sure we'll have Trump-branded cures coming soon. Look, what are your former colleagues? Are any of them able to talk, and what are they telling you?
Well, I think there's a lot of fear. It is very clear that the new Trump folks have come in, and it's not just Trump; it's the way he is kind of handed over the reins to Elon Musk and this cabal of people around Elon Musk who are taking over aspects of the personnel management, financial management of the government. These are public functions that should be subject to public oversight. They have very carefully constructed rules over time to make sure that nobody is misusing information. Nobody is acting in a way that is corrupt in how they're spending the money. And we have these folks coming in, firing a whole bunch of people, threatening to fire more people, putting people on immediate administrative leave, shutting down websites, locking people out of computer systems they rely on for their work. It's created a lot of fear, and that's been the purpose. I mean, the idea is clearly to make the civil servants think if you cross us, if you're not 100% on board with our program, we will find ways of getting rid of you and making your lives miserable, whether it's legal to do that or not.
Well, let me ask you about the legal question. I don't understand how a private citizen, even if the president asks you to do it, has the right to direct federal employees. I don't understand where that authority comes from. I also don't understand how a private citizen can take a server and plug it into OPM's tech stack. That sounds like an enormous security risk that can't be legal. Can't be legal. Is it?
Yeah. I mean, so I will say it is hard to know exactly what is going on because they're doing a really good job of trying to keep from the public all the stuff that they are doing, but what you're describing would absolutely not be legal. There are a whole array of federal laws designed to protect the security of federal computing. I mean, obviously, right? Like, when I was working in the government, both in the White House and at the Department of Health and Human Services, we had to confront real concerns that outside bad actors would try to infiltrate our computer systems. There are laws about that designed to protect us. And yeah, I mean, everything I'm reading, again, hard to know exactly what's going on, but it certainly sounds like those laws are being just disregarded by people who don't feel like they need to comply with the law. They feel like they know better.
And in a normal course of government, if somebody were breaking the law in the ways we've just described, who would hold them to account? Who would investigate? Who would bring charges?
Well, it's a great question because it's a lot of the people who the Trump administration is in the process of firing. So, one very significant way that we assure that executive agencies are complying with the law is we have independent inspectors general who are supposed to make sure that both laws are followed and there's no waste or abuse in the carrying out of the responsibilities of agencies. Well, we saw that Trump fired a whole slew of inspectors general without providing the notice and without providing the reasons required by law. Sometimes what we're talking about is criminal activity that would be subject to criminal investigation and prosecution. Well, we've seen already reports that, Trump has and Trump's appointees have announced that, senior folks at the FBI are going to be fired or reassigned, and that they've asked for the names of literally thousands of FBI employees who might have been involved in, investigating Trump or January 6th. And those folks might be fired. We've seen prosecutors around the country in U.S. attorneys' offices being fired. So, I think what we have is a systematic effort by this administration to remove the checks that are designed to keep them from operating within the law. Now, ordinarily, I am, among other things, a professor of constitutional law, and you might go back to, James Madison in Federalist 10 and say, look, the basic premise of our Constitution is ambition checks ambition. We have separation of powers. And so we would look to Congress to conduct oversight. But Congress, under the leadership of the Republican Party at this point, is clearly just rolling over for President Trump. Now, the minority party needs to be doing more to be pushing these issues. But as a practical matter, congressional oversight really depends on who's in the majority, and they've shown no interest in it. So you have this systematic effort to get rid of all the checks.
Yeah, you left one out of that very good list, Sam, and that would be the Supreme Court, the judiciary, and they opted out before he even became president. I mean, they certainly opted out of protecting democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we are seeing now, we saw from the mass pardons on day one of the January 6th participants that there is a reason why we have Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Democracies had learned not to let insurrectionists back into the government, and yet the Supreme Court effectively declared that a dead letter. The Supreme Court issued an incredibly broad ruling on criminal immunity for the president, way broader than anyone could possibly have anticipated. I think they bear a lot of the responsibility here. Now, I do think there will be instances in the next months and years when the Supreme Court will step in and say, this guy has gone too far. But I think if we're expecting the Supreme Court to be just saving us from this lawless behavior, that's not going to happen generally. Again, maybe some of the more extreme things, the most extreme things, but a lot of them, they're just not going to be present for.
Yeah, I've never thought John Roberts was a friend of the idea of democracy. He's very suspicious of people. So he undermined the Voting Rights Act. He opted out of federal judicial responsibility over gerrymandering. released all the corporate money, dark money into politics. So I agree with you. I think there are going to be areas where they will check outrageous behavior, but not outrageous when it comes to undermining democracy. Outrageous in other ways. Outrageous in ways that might hurt American business. Maybe they'll check that. Yeah. So Sam, I've taken time because I wouldn't have, but I took time because the Republican Party was so interested in it. I thought I should look at it to study what happened in Hungary and what happened with their democracy and that playbook. And, it involved a few really clear steps, like, tell a whole bunch of outrageous lies to distract people from what you're really doing. Check. Gain control of a political party. Check. When in power, do everything you can to get control of every possible lever of government. And that's what we're seeing, right? And if they do, the next step is to change the rules so you can never vote them out. How do we defend ourselves?
I think that people, I think there is too much complacency about that. I think the idea that we're going to sit around and wait for people to get angry about the price of eggs, and so that's going to solve the problem, that is not the way to address this. I think we need to be on our guard. I think we have other examples of paths we could follow that are not Hungary. I mean, we have Poland, for example, where there was definitely an effort to move in the Hungary direction, and then there was pushback, and
Yep.
It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a generational fight there, but it's not in the same place as where Hungary is. So I think it's
Yep.
not getting complacent about it. It's not treating it as ordinary politics. It is being really attentive to what the issues are. It's maintaining one thing we have in the United States that progressives don't always love, but is actually really important right now, is we have federalism. We have separate state governments that can stand up for the right thing. In the state you're broadcasting from, Illinois, you have a governor who has been very much a leader on this stuff, and I think we can see more in that regard.
Yeah, I think the Great Lakes have been, we're doing our job all around the Great Lakes. Ohio, maybe not, but the rest of the, and Indiana has this tiny little sliver, but mostly the Great Lakes are doing what they should do. For those of you who just tuned in, I'm talking to Sam Bagnestos, who, among other things, was general counsel at the Department of Health and Human Services. So what does the prospect of Bobby Kennedy mean?
Oh, I think it's just incredibly chilling. I mean, if you paid any attention to his confirmation hearings this week, you saw someone who is completely unprepared to be the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. HHS is, at least as far as money goes, the largest cabinet department. It's got a $1.7 trillion budget, 80,000 employees. It finances the healthcare system. It regulates the healthcare system, but also provides a lot of basic social services that people rely on. Also, promotes research into health. And, we have somebody who couldn't tell the difference between Medicare and Medicaid, in very basic ways.
Yep.
And even when he messed that up on his first day of hearings, he came back to it on his second day of hearings and messed it up again. Like,
Still
he obviously
right.
also has no interest in trying to do the job. He's someone who has peddled all sorts of phony cures for various things. He's an anti-vaxxer. He tried to back away from that, but in a very slippery way. He claims he's not an anti-vaxxer, but he claims he's just asking questions. We all know what that means. And we've seen over and over and over again, he raises these debunked arguments about vaccines. Now, look, I'm all in favor of having a full debate about all the evidence, but, there is no question about, do vaccines cause autism, right? That has been, extensively studied and resolved. He's still asking questions about it. So many things that he is doing that would be very harmful to the public health. A lot of people say, well, it's great that he's focusing on food. We should do a lot more to have a healthy food system and to focus on prevention. But, there are lots of ways of doing that without having someone who just has completely anti-scientific, anti-health views at the head of our health department.
Yeah. I had two thoughts that are very similar to yours. You said he was clearly unprepared to be secretary. I saw someone who was so contemptuous they wouldn't even prepare for a hearing. I mean, really, I could prepare for that hearing and sound like I was ready to be secretary. I'm not ready to be secretary of HHS. Don't get me wrong, but you could do the work to at least be ready for the hearing. And he didn't even do that. That's just contempt of everybody.
Yeah.
That's not what a leader does. A leader says, look, I have a responsibility to the public and to the members of Congress. And it's not just that the king is going to appoint me and nobody else matters. That's just not how it's supposed to be. So that was offensive to me. And then on this issue of sort of, children in school should eat healthy meals. That's great. Has he ever been in a school where you got to put 500 kids through a cafeteria, that seats 30. So they start at 10 in the morning and at 2:40 they finish with lunch and everybody's in there for 20 minutes. And by the way, there's 3 people in the kitchen staff. They're lucky if they can heat up the frozen pizza. I mean, it would cost $1 billion to do that.
Yeah.
He's just guaranteeing that they don't eat at all.
I think that, you're highlighting a couple of really important points. I mean, there is this just absolute contempt, and the sense of entitlement, the sense that he can go around and cause all this harm and he doesn't have to pay attention to anybody else's interests. Would you hire someone who completely failed to prepare for their job interview? Of course you wouldn't, right? But that's obviously what happened here. And also, I think the point you make about food and lunch, like these are complicated questions. And that's why we need serious people in government, people who care about the problems of governance. And, whether it's Bobby Kennedy or all of these folks Elon Musk is bringing on, what we're seeing is people who just don't care, who don't appreciate that it is complex to try to provide for the needs of, people across a large and diverse country as ours is. And, in these very complex systems that we're operating, whether they're schools or hospitals or anything else. And so, I think it's really going to be devastating to ordinary people and what we rely on from government. People think this is, I don't think a lot of people are out there signing on to every tittle of what, Trump and Musk are doing right now. And I think that's even true of the people who voted for him. But I think they're going to find that it's going to be really devastating, the stuff they have taken for granted for a long time.
Oh, I agree. I mean, and the biggest example this week was Jamie Dimon, who, last week was nod, nod, wink, wink. Oh, I don't really think tariffs are so bad. And today is like, we're going to redo all of our counsel to all of our investors because this could be a disaster. Yeah, they're going to wake up and, but this is not a new piece of history. When you decide that you're going to be okay by telling the boss whatever the boss wants to hear and give him more power to do whatever he wants. An unchecked presidency was never in our Constitution, was never in our, it was never in our Constitution, the piece of paper that describes our country, or in the Constitution of our character. That's just not who we've ever been.
Yeah, I think, that's definitely right. And if you go back and look at the writings at the time of the founding, obviously a lot of injustices we had to get past from the time of the founding. But one of the things that I think was a very positive aspect of the political thinking of the people who wrote our Constitution was they had a real belief in Republican virtue, that the people who we would elect would be people who took seriously their responsibility to serve the public as a whole and not just to serve their own parochial interests. And, we just lost that, and I think we really see that now.
Yeah, this crowd doesn't get it. Um, I was not a big fan of George Bush's. The war in Iraq was radicalizing for me in some ways because of how awful it was. But his presidency did something miraculous and wonderful, and that was PEPFAR. Um, can you imagine a president saying, yeah, even though we've come very close to eradicating AIDS on a whole continent in Africa, we're going to pull the plug and let it come back?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's just beyond belief. I mean, I agree. You know, I think George W. Bush was a terrible president, and you know, the Iraq War and the way he prosecuted the Afghanistan war and so much else, the restraints on civil liberties in the United States, you know, all are things we're still actually dealing with the consequences of. The one really great thing he did, and it was a really great thing, was PEPFAR, which, you know, has come really close to eradicating AIDS in Africa, not completely, but, you know, has made an enormous difference to save lives across a continent that people don't really care about. But, you know, I mean, millions of lives. And, you know, I mean, you know, Donald Trump doesn't care about that. And in fact, I think there's a degree to which he has this sort of rivalry with Bush. And so is perfectly happy, even gleeful, of making Bush's, you know, great success go away. I just can't even understand the mentality that leads you to that.
Well, I wouldn't ask anyone to try and get in the man's head. It's too dangerous and ill a place. I would definitely not ask you to do that. And I don't think it matters. You know what? What matters is what the impact of what he does on all of us. Whatever he thinks his motivation is, it's irrelevant. So you teach constitutional law. Would you say we are in a constitutional crisis?
I think we are. I mean, I think we have, and you know, that's a phrase that gets overused, and so I think people are kind of numb to it, and I understand why people are numb to it. But you know, in the less than 2 weeks that Trump has been back as president, and he telegraphed all of this during the campaign. I mean, none of this should be a surprise to anybody. The fact that people are surprised, you know, shows, I think, a failure on a bunch of folks' parts in getting the word out. But in less than 2 weeks since he's been back, he has systematically, you know, both colonized the government with outsiders, you know, the Elon Musk crowd, and gotten rid of, you know, many of the significant checks on his power. And yeah, I think that is a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, I do too. Very dangerous. I may part company with you a little bit on the fact that people are acting surprised right now. I think the word was out. I think the surprise you're seeing now is Claude Rains out in front of Rick's getting handed the chips saying, oh, I'm shocked there's gambling here.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you. I hear you on that. There probably is some Claude Rains to it, but I can tell you, I mean, I have a lot of people calling me up and saying, you know, I knew they'd be bad, but I had no idea they'd be this bad. And, you know, this is really, I think the goal in part on the part of the Trump people is to demoralize folks into just kind of letting it happen. And, you know, we need to not be demoralized. I mean, we know this is going to be a big fight, and we need to engage that fight.
Yes, we do. And we need to, I mean, where I'm drawing the line, because there's so much we cannot protect here, particularly when the people who are supposed to be, I mean, for all I know, if Kash Patel goes down as FBI and doesn't get the job, and he should not get the job, I did that terrible thought experiment where I went into Trump's head this morning, and here's where I came out. His next nominee is going to be Stuart Rhodes. You know, I mean, he would do it, right?
There's a degree to which you'd say, oh no, that couldn't possibly happen. But, you know, I don't think anything is unthinkable at this point. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think he wants to, he wants to control law enforcement. And he said he wants to, I am your retribution. I am going to use the power of government for retribution. So no one who commits a crime in my name will be prosecuted by the federal government. That is an enormous challenge for our country, an enormous lawless challenge. So for me, where I think we have to draw the unbreachable line is protecting the right to vote, protecting our ability to throw them out.
Yes, absolutely. And we have seen through the years, and this way precedes Trump, we have seen through the years, many significant elements in the Republican Party trying to keep people from being able to vote, not just promoting gerrymandering, which you talked about, but, this whole array of vote suppressive laws, trying to intimidate people, to have people challenging voters at the polls. When I went to college in North Carolina, I graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1990 in the middle of the Harvey Gantt, Jesse Helms campaign. We saw that there, and we continue to see the same thing. But now I think the threats are much, much greater. So I totally agree. We need to be defending the right to vote.
Congress has passed, the House has passed the SAVE Act, which will make it harder for people to vote. For sure. I don't know if somebody asked me to prove my citizenship. I guess I have a passport I could find. But think about people who don't. It costs money to prove your citizenship. You have to pay to go get a birth certificate. Yeah. It takes time. All of that is a poll tax in some ways.
We've fought these battles before, and we thought we won them. I mean, when I was the principal deputy assistant attorney general for civil rights in the Obama administration, I argued a case against the state of Arizona in federal court where they were trying to get citizenship information from people who were registering to vote, and we got the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, to agree that that was unlawful. And now, that they're trying to fight back. So they're trying to roll this back.
That was your case? Congratulations.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. But oops, that piece of work they're trying to undo, for sure.
And it's just, and I think the goal is to make it feel Sisyphean, and I think we just have to not get demoralized by it and understand this is what our democracy is going to depend on, is people getting engaged in the fight.
Yep. And I got a lot of listeners here who are engaged. I don't think demoralized is how we feel. Angry, for sure. Motivated, for sure. A little confused about what's the best strategy. It's I don't think anybody's ready to give up. What did you think of a military helicopter runs into a civilian airplane, people are dead, and the president of the United States says, I have no evidence, but common sense tells me this is the fault of diversity?
It's horrible. I mean, I don't even know what to say about that. I mean, obviously, this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy that it's going to take some time to really figure out what caused the problem. What was the proximate cause? I think we have some good sense that we've been putting increasing pressure on our air traffic control system because of the hollowing out of the federal government. I mean, we've known for years that people in air traffic control are overworked. And I think this even goes back to President Reagan, firing all the air traffic controllers.
Patco.
Yeah, exactly. So the system is very stressed, and that's obviously a part of it. But what the immediate cause is, that's why you have investigations, and to instantly go to this hateful, bigoted, it's DEI, attacking FAA for hiring people who have disabilities, it's just disgusting. I mean, I have nothing to say other than that.
So this is where we get to you and me. You mean, you're a phenomenally educated man. You're a professor. And the reaction is not some, appeal to law. It is just disgust. And I just think that's right. We're going to take this first and foremost as human beings, and this behavior is disgusting. It's beneath the dignity of a citizen, let alone a president.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's horrible. And, there are, of course, legal issues all around here. And, we will have conversations about those and pursue legal remedies in the appropriate fora. But I think fundamentally, just look at what's going on. Is this the kind of country you want to be living in? Are these the kind of leaders you want to have? And, I think people should really not overread the message of the election. Trump won. That's absolutely true. But first of all, a majority of people didn't vote for him, but more people voted for him than voted for anybody else. That's true. But were they voting for this? No. Probably not. Some were, but most weren't. And so people shouldn't be afraid to stand up and call this disgusting behavior for what it is.
Yep. Well, on that topic of discussing behavior, 30,000 to take the capacity of Guantanamo to house 30,000 people that he's going to pick off the streets saying, "Oh, you're here illegally," without due process, put them in a place that is away from the scrutiny of the press, away from really almost any kind of oversight. How is it? First, what do you think of that, and how do we stop that?
Yeah, look, number one, I think it needs to be said, Guantanamo has been a stain on this country for a long time, and the way we've used it, whether during the George W. Bush era war on terror or before and after with housing and really imprisoning people who were interdicted on the seas who were coming to the United States. It's been a stain. And Trump isn't causing that. But, what Trump is doing is he's taking that, up he's taking that up, a bazillion times. So what he's doing is now saying we're going to take people who are in the United States, and if somebody decides that they're folks who are not citizens or not lawfully here, we'll send them to Guantanamo if we can't send them back somewhere else. It's horrible. It's threatening to create a concentration camp of people who, we want to keep separate from the United States. That's not how we ought to be. That's not how we ought to be engaging this. And if you think that this is going to be limited to people who are actually here without legal authorization, we've already seen, people getting swept up in immigration enforcement in this last couple of weeks, who are Puerto Rican, that is American citizens. Obviously this is going to facilitate and be fed by racial profiling of the worst kind.
Absolutely. And if they sweep up a journalist or two they really hate, that's the way these things work around the world. And again, you have to be able to think of these terrible things because every time you think you've thought the worst, they have found a way to go lower.
Yeah.
So Barack Obama promised to close Guantanamo, and he was not able to do it. I don't understand that, but I assume that challenges in closing it were bigger than I can imagine. But Donald Trump looks at Guantanamo and says, "Oh, it's not a disgrace to be closed. It's an opportunity I can take advantage of." And again, we have to see this man in the White House for who he is, and that is somebody who is not on our side in any fashion.
He sees, any constraint as something to be eliminated or blown through, and he sees any opportunity to serve his own venal interests or, his own political interests as something that he is going to take advantage of, even if that means, dividing the American people, especially if that means stirring up prejudice and hatred against elements of the American people. He is the worst case scenario.
Sam, are you teaching a constitutional law course this term?
Not this term, which in some ways is good because everything is moving so quickly. But I will certainly have a lot to talk about, the next time I do teach it.
Yeah, I am teaching a course in democracy right now, and I can't keep up with events. What are the students, the law students in particular, thinking about the future of law when they see lawlessness in the federal government?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of, doubt and uncertainty among people about like what they're doing with their lives, when you look at law students. Now, I've always tried to make clear to my students, the law is not something that enforces itself. The courts are not always the friends of what you might think of as the right understanding of law. What you want to do is understand.
Hey, Case, can you fix that echo? I hear it too.
You there?
I am. You know what? Is it fixed now? Good. Okay, you can go.
Yeah.
Sam?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I'm here. So, the law is not always going to work the way it's supposed to work. The law is a tool that is part of a broader politics, and it only works when there is, real political support for carrying out legal principles and basic constitutional principles of democracy and equality and fair play. And those are the things we have to be fighting for all the time. But anyone who thinks that there's some easy trick, you just go to court and file a lawsuit and people are going to be persuaded by what you've written. It doesn't take very long as a practicing lawyer to realize that's not quite how it works.
No, I had a very smart man tell me that 20% of the time in a court of law, Abe Lincoln, I could have been convicted for shooting Abe Lincoln, even though we didn't live at the same time. It's not foolproof for sure.